It's 10:17 a.m. on July 30th, 2026, and over the next few hours, more fuel is going to burn at this terminal than in its previous 3 attacks put together, though nobody at Volna knows that yet. All they know right now is that 6 dots have crossed the coastline, heading straight for the fuel terminal. At first glance, a 5-kilogram drone could easily pass for a lost toy quadcopter or a precision munition, and honestly, it's both. The first generation of Ukrainian attack drones back in 2022 started exactly this way, a civilian DJI Mavic with a grenade duct taped to the frame. The operator running the Russian Podlyut K1 radar jots down perimeter patrol, usual time, in his log, then does a double take at the screen. Every day at this exact hour, the fuel terminal's private security contractor sends up 4 quadcopters to patrol 3 kilometers of coastline. Today there are 6. Nobody warned him, and these aren't patrol drones. They're FPV attack drones, carrying 3 kilograms of explosives each, with barely 20 minutes of flight time, roughly the time it takes to half-charge a phone, just enough to get in, detonate, and never fly back. The protocol gives him 14 seconds to decide something he doesn't want to decide. Get it wrong, and it's his 3rd false alarm in 2 months. The last one turned out to be a flock of pelicans, and a 3rd strike means 30 days pulled off radar duty. 10 seconds pass. If these are real and he stays quiet, every minute of silence costs a 5,000-ton tank. 7 seconds. His hand is already resting on the switch. He doesn't press it. 4 seconds. Nothing. The lead drone isn't waiting on his decision either way. It has already picked out tank RVS-11, memorized from more than 10,000 satellite images. It doesn't need a second look, and it starts its final descent to 30 meters over the water, close enough to the radar site to nearly clip it without ever being flagged. It's the drone equivalent of walking through a bank's service entrance in a cleaning company uniform. Nobody checks ID on someone who already looks like they belong there. The lead drone crosses the perimeter fence. The operator never flips his switch. 800 meters remain to tank RVS-11 at 140 kilometers an hour, about 20 seconds, and in that stretch, there's nothing on site capable of shooting it down. The closest Pantsir system needs at least 1.5 kilometers of range to intercept something this small and this low, and the inner perimeter guards only carry rifles good to 400 meters. But hanging over tank RVS-11 is one of the stranger defenses this war has produced, and one that actually stands a real chance: the cope cage. It's essentially an anti-drone frame, the same concept Russian T-72 tanks have used since before 2022, now adapted for refineries starting in 2024. It isn't a fine mesh, it's a grid of 8mm steel pipes suspended above the tank with 60-centimeter gaps between bars, like the bars on a large gate. The logic is simple: anything that strikes a pipe detonates there instead of against the tank itself. Volna installed its cage 45 days after the May attack. But this FPV is small enough to avoid every single pipe, measuring just 34 centimeters across. It slides cleanly through a 60-centimeter gap with 13 centimeters of clearance on either side, a cat sliding through fence bars built to stop a dog. The cage was designed against a much bigger FPV, the same 6-meter wingspan type that hit Taman back in May. Exactly the threat the cage was built to catch. Nobody accounted for something 18 times smaller counting as a threat too. 4 seconds later, RVS-11 erupts into a 15-meter fireball. But that's only the first tank. 400 meters north, a second FPV finds an identical gap in an identical cage and slams into RVS-14. A third loses altitude too early and detonates against the retaining wall of RVS-9 without ever climbing high enough. 3 drones are still airborne, each already carrying its own target. No fresh instructions needed. You might be wondering how a drone with only 20 minutes of battery life covers 270 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian base. It obviously couldn't have launched from anywhere near Taman itself. That ground is thick with radars, Pantsir batteries, and Russian eyes. No launch from there would survive an hour undetected. The real answer is that hours earlier, out at sea, a Seababy unmanned boat set out with all 6 FPVs already loaded aboard. $200,000, unmanned, with a 1,500-kilometer range, enough to cover the long leg of the journey on its own, while the drones sat powered down inside. It cruised for 3 hours at roughly 15 kilometers an hour, closing the final 45 kilometers in near silence until it sat 4 kilometers off the coast, and that's where it released its cargo. It didn't leave afterward either, because it's not just a delivery vehicle. Each FPV streams its video feed to the Seababy, which relays it by satellite to an operator sitting more than 300 kilometers away with 2 monitors in front of him. It's essentially an aircraft carrier the size of a fishing boat, the only relay point for 300 kilometers in any direction. Sync it in the next few minutes, and the 3 drones still airborne go blind mid-flight. But nobody at Volna even knows this boat exists yet. All they know is that 2 tanks have been burning for 90 seconds, and someone is finally about to push a button. Not the alarm nobody listened to, but a far more expensive one, the Krasuka 4. At 10:26, the Volna command post finally authorizes what should have happened 9 minutes earlier, powering up the Krasuka 4. It's a jamming system with a 350-kilometer range mounted across 2 8-wheeled Kamaz trucks, each roughly the size of a moving van, built to blind AWACS radars and choke off satellite links across the X, Ku, and Ka bands. It isn't aimed at the drones themselves. It's aimed at the one link that actually matters, the satellite signal tying the Seababy back to its operator 300 kilometers away. But switching on the Krasuka 4 isn't a flip of a single switch. The system needs 90 seconds to calibrate its antenna and sweep all 3 bands until it locks the right frequency. 90 seconds the 3 remaining FPVs simply don't need. The Krasuka 4 costs more than the rest of the base combined, and a stopwatch beat it anyway. 2 of the 3 drones had already received their final coordinates 40 seconds earlier. No further orders required, just finish the dive already in progress. The 3rd is 27 seconds behind, still correcting course, exactly when the operator's screen 300 kilometers away dissolves into static. The first 2 arrive on their own, the way a pilot lets go of the yoke once the approach is already locked in. RVS-2 and RVS-6 go up 40 seconds apart. The 3rd drone, thrown off by the jamming, drifts 200 meters east and loses altitude, slow enough and low enough to finally fall inside actual rifle range. A guard empties a magazine at it from 150 meters and connects. The drone comes apart instantly. Nobody at Volna is celebrating. The Krasuka 4 keeps blasting full power out over open water, with nothing left out there to jam. And while every radar, every operator, and every spare set of eyes stays locked on the sea, 40 kilometers inland, 4 more dots are already crossing the border along a path nobody is watching. At 10:31, those 4 dots crossing the border are identified as FP-1s, the same drone class the Cage Math was originally built around, as they clear the last hills and turn south. They aren't here to open a fresh tank. Each one is carrying 120 kilograms of explosives to finish what the FPVs already started, and unlike the 6 Seababy drones, they aren't coming from the sea. They're coming from the east, a 270-kilometer, 3-hour flight from a Ukrainian launch site near Zaporizhia Oblast. 4 kilometers away, crouched in a roadside ditch for the last 40 minutes. A soldier with a Vrba launcher on his shoulder is sweating in the late morning heat. A long-range radar, 80 kilometers out, had warned him long before there was anything to actually see. At 10:33, a dark shape finally breaks the horizon, flying low, almost skimming the wheat. The first FP1, still 7 kilometers out, well outside his range. He tracks it in his sight without moving. 4 seconds later, it crosses inside 6.5 kilometers into Vrba range. He holds his breath and fires. The 9M336 missile launches at Mach 1.5, locks onto the engine's heat signature at 1.2 kilometers, and detonates. Debris at 400 degrees rains onto an empty field. He smiles, but there's no relief in it, because reloading takes longer than the 3 remaining FP1s need to cross his window, and he watches them pass by helplessly at 200 kilometers an hour, straight toward the terminal he was supposed to be defending. 3 remain. The first reaches tank RVS-11 at 10:34, the very tank a 3-kilogram FPV cracked open 17 minutes earlier. An FP1 carries 120 kilograms of explosive, 40 times more, and where there was once a 40-centimeter crack, now there's a crater. But what actually finishes off RVS-11 isn't the second impact. It's what's been cooking underneath for 17 minutes. This terminal stores crude with 20 centimeters of standing water at the base of its older tanks, and 20 minutes of surface fire has already driven heat down to that layer. The second strike tears the roof open just as that water, superheated past 100 degrees under the weight of fuel above it, flashes instantly into steam. The tank doesn't just burn, it ruptures. A column of burning fuel launches 45 meters into the air and rains down across the 3 nearest tanks. It's a boilover, the exact phenomenon industrial firefighting manuals cover with one instruction: evacuate, never attempt to extinguish it. RVS-13 and RVS-15, untouched until now, don't need a drone of their own. RVS-13's roof gives way within 8 seconds under the burning spray. RVS-15, farther off, only catches a light drizzle of burning droplets across an open vent valve nobody sealed, and an open valve exposed to outside fire shows no mercy. The escaping vapor ignites mid-air, and the flame travels 6 meters backward into the tank mouth in under 3 seconds. Meanwhile, the second FP1 has its own separate target. Tank RVS-1, one of the few that never got a cage at all, takes a direct hit at 10:35 and burns on its own, no outside heat required. Volna had only managed to install 4 cages since January, out of the 12 it actually needed. By 10:36, 7 tanks are on fire. The third FP1 has no single tank left to aim at, so it targets the pipe manifold connecting all 12 and detonates it at 10:38. From that point, the fire doesn't need drones, Vrbas, or Krasuka anymore. It has its own underground fuel highway to run on. Firefighters from Temryuk arrive at 10:52, 34 minutes too late, and stop 300 meters out. No foam hose can stand up to an active boilover, and protocol says to wait. They watch the fire decide for itself how many tanks it's going to take. By 11:20, all 12 tanks at the Taman complex are burning simultaneously, columns of smoke visible from 90 kilometers up over the Black Sea. 700 kilometers overhead, a NASA-firm satellite had already logged the first heat signature over Taman at 10:41, 11 minutes before the first fire truck even left its station. The fire eventually spread across 17,000 square meters, more than 2 soccer fields combined. 60,000 tons of fuel were lost that morning, enough to fill 1,000 tanker cars, the same figure Ukraine would later use to describe the damage. Nobody at Volna realized until much later that all of it started with something roughly the size of a dinner plate slipping through a 60-centimeter gap that an anti-drone cage should never have left open. At 6 the next morning, with smoke from Taman still climbing over the Black Sea, Russia's Ministry of Defense signed off on reinforcing Pantsir S-1 batteries along the entire Krasnodar coastline, the third time that's happened in 2026. Every naval reinforcement means fewer systems on the front line. Every system pulled to the front means some other stretch of coast goes unprotected. Russia simply doesn't have enough hardware to cover 1,200 kilometers of coastline and a 1,000-kilometer front at the same time, and this single morning proved it twice, once at sea and once on land. The total cost of the operation, in round numbers, $12,000 for the 6 FPVs, $200,000 for the Seababy, and roughly $1 million for the 4 FP1s. Against that, with no official Russian figure released, the fuel losses alone are estimated above $30 million, not even counting the 12 tanks, the pipe manifold, or the cage. Nobody is going to rebuild the same way twice. Of the 10 drones launched that morning, Russian defenses managed to bring down exactly 2, one by rifle, one by Vrba. The other 8, the radar operator who hesitated, the cage with the wrong-sized gap, the Krasuka that arrived 90 seconds late, stopped nothing at all. But the real story here isn't the fuel. It's that Taman has now been hit 4 separate times in 2026, and Russia's response is always the same: a new defense built against the last attack, never against the next one. That 17,000 square meter scorch mark was already spreading across social media before anyone had even finished documenting it. If a $1.2 million operation can slip through a 60-centimeter gap in the most expensive defensive setup on the Russian coast, the real question for every commander between Krasnodar and Vladivostok isn't whether it happens again, it's when. If breakdowns like this are useful to you, hit subscribe and drop a comment with the next target or system you want covered next.